It's loading. And we are live. Woo! Today
Hey.
we have Meredith from Scooby Prep, Mare, and she is going to answer a few questions about menopause and hormonal health. And go ahead and give us a brief introduction of yourself.
Yeah. So I guess by degree, I am currently still actually just not practicing a formal hygienist. So that is what my degree was in. I have my associates in health science. I worked clinically chairside for many years and then started doing coaching just out of really seeing like so much missing with regard to my clients and their health, reviewing health history, or just getting more into what's happening with regard to their nutrition, their health. And I just felt like there's such a disconnect, understanding, and we're not going to talk about an oral health lecture, but just the massive systemic links with regard to our oral health and systemic health. And also with what I was going through personally, quite my hormone, I'm not going to say struggles, but just experiences, and that got me into kind of coaching part-time. Just I'm a big nerd, so just started feeling such a disconnect with regard to females' health in general, and that sent me down towards many rabbit holes of researching and doing courses and lectures and all these pieces, just so I can educate myself more, so I could hopefully help my clients and empower them. And that's really been like guiding my journey like this entire time, is the seasons and changes that I have gone under, as well as my clients and what they have been experiencing. And so it just has sent me down quite the, I would say, more functional nutrition, hybrid health. There's so many names out there, pathway, and really focusing on the body systemically. But right now, I will say that hormonal health, definitely through the different changes in a female, regardless fertility and beyond, is massive focus for me.
Mhm. So, a lot of like getting ready for menopause, going through menopause, and helping people. I like to call it deep health, like just the
Yeah.
systems that you have in place to like not get through life, but like thrive through life. So, yeah, I think we call it different things, but I like how it's integrative, functional. It's just looking at the
Yeah.
whole.
It's
Yeah.
super important. And I think that, for myself as a coach, regardless of if I have a client that comes to me with, hypothalamic amenorrhea, which is the lack of menences, so they're not having a period. And so this is a female, say like in her teens to maybe 30s, to somebody who might be having PCOS, or somebody who has maybe horrendous cycles. I'm actually thinking about that person's health in the immediate, but as well as what's going to be happening later down the road as they do enter more of that perimenopausal time period, which is the period before menopause, which is 1 day, and then that postmenopausal time. Because what we're doing in these earlier years is really setting up the foundation for what is happening later on.
Mhm. So that's a perfect segue into how can you set yourself up for a smoother transition from perimenopause to menopause? And I don't know if this is a separate topic, but even into postmenopause, if you're
Yeah.
in your 20s, 30s, or 40s right now.
Yeah, so I'm gonna say start earlier. Early. There's no better time than today, regardless of how old you are, regardless on whether you are, working on a fertility journey or postpartum or none of the above, and you're in your 20s. So starting with, I would say number one, ensuring that you are having cycles, you are having ovulatory menstrual cycles regularly, so a monthly cycle. Looking at strength training. So super important. Again, this is way beyond before you're, perimenopausal, menopausal, postmenopausal, but laying that groundwork with, strength training, nutrition, digestive health, stress management, even, all these things are going to be laying the foundations to what's going to happen later on. And so I think that that's where being a little bit more preventative and proactive is going to be the most serving. Not saying that somebody who perhaps is perimenopausal or postmenopausal, everything's too late. Absolutely not. But focusing on these things, like making sure we are eating, and I'm going to say very loosely, adequate calories, adequate macronutrients, micronutrients. I'm going to say that very loosely because I think, what is adequate to one human and versus another is going to be very different. So there is no, you must eat X amount of calories or these are the macronutrients. But really focusing on food quality, again, digestive health, all these things are going to be instrumental to your present health, but absolutely paramount for later on down the road as well.
So when you say preventative things like setting yourself up, do you mostly mean habits?
A lot of it habits, because those habits are going to translate into what's happening internally. Now, the caveat there would be you getting more specified with regard to, we can have the best habits, the best intentions with regard to nutrition, strength training, and then sometimes life just throws some curveballs and we might be dealing with some autoimmune situations with clients. We might be dealing with some genetic factors, even though genetics might hold the gun, but environment pulls the trigger. So I think it comes down to trying to do the absolute best that we can with what we have, and understanding that what we really can control is probably more than we realize. And often with clients, I find that it comes down to what you really want and making sure what you want aligns with the future goals. But yeah, so I think it does come down to habits, because habits is a series of choices. And we, for the most part, not everybody is in, such a great situation, but for the most part, many people do have the ability to make choices with regard to their nutrition. Not everybody. And I think that that's really important, especially for coaches with regard to their client, is understanding what really is accessible to them, and making sure you're coaching the client and not just an ideal situation, but you're coaching the client within their ideal situation and what they have to their ability.
So pretending that we're in a situation where a client is in their like fertile stages and they're on hormonal birth control. So the first thing you said is making sure you have as many natural monthly cycles as possible.
Which unfortunately is not happening. If you're on birth control, you are not having ovulatory cycles. You're not, so I think that just needs to be a blanket statement across the board, is you need to understand that if you are on a hormonal birth control, you are not having natural cycles. You are not producing progesterone. That is not happening. You are essentially using synthetic hormones, shutting down that process because you are on a birth control, controlling that process. And it really is that quote natural process, that's the cycling of the hormones. As much as for many females that can be absolutely horrendous, which if it is horrendous, your cycle, then I think diving into why is it horrendous, and maybe not necessarily finding the one thing that is making it horrendous, but perhaps again those habit and lifestyle pieces that can improve things, I think is where the key is at. But if you are on a hormonal based birth control, you're not getting the benefits of those cyclical rhythms that hormones provide. So that's the estrogen and the progesterone fluctuating, because those have profound effects with regard to our heart health, our brain health, our bone health, our muscle health, our immune system. And you're not getting that. I think though it is really important for me to say too, and this is where many people probably disagree with me, is I'm also very thoughtful to the client. And it is very important to me that I ask the question of, why are you on birth control? Because here again, there are, endocrine conditions such as endometriosis, fibroids, things like that. And there comes down to a quality of life piece.
Yep.
However, I just really think it's important to inform a client that they understand the also potential negative implications that can happen, that are very positively going to happen, but it does come down to a quality of life. And I think that that's really important too, that we perhaps approach females with a little bit less judgment, and asking more appropriate questions. And then absolutely, I think that there does need to come a time where that conversation has to happen about coming off a birth control, especially I think too, what comes down to that question too is asking them, why were you put on birth control? And then hearing females and when, and hearing females who have been on birth control for like 30 some years.
Yeah.
And then having a physician say, well, you may be in menopause, you maybe not be, I don't know. Let's just see what happens. And going back to, setting yourself up to menopause or post menopause, that is where it's so important to have those natural fluctuations of hormones, to have that spikes in estrogen to promote basically ovulation, to have the progesterone that comes from ovulation, because those rhythms and spikes within, the female's body, those are triggering events throughout the body. And that's what is important for supporting the immune system, supporting bone growth and cell turnover. That's not happening if we're not having these fluctuations. Now, what happens with birth control is I feel like most people get on birth control because they're having perhaps like these high highs and low lows, and it's just like, these natural beautiful fluctuations that I'm talking about are just like more like a freaking roller coaster ride from hell.
Yep.
And again, I have been on birth control. I was on many different types of birth control, right? So I have been down that rabbit hole in my youth, and I definitely understand it. But I think coming down to asking the questions like why you're on it, how long have you been on it, and then discussing perhaps, are you willing to start coming off of that? Is that appropriate conversation to have with that female and her provider? It really needs to be very nuanced, I find. Understanding though that being on a birth control long term, we're going to be losing so many things that are super important for setting you up for that perimenopause and menopause time. Those hormones like are vital with regard to like our brain health, like I said, cardiac, like your heart health, lungs, eyes, like it's not just about fertility. And I think that that's what a lot of people think, that females hormones, or females maybe, our purpose is fertility, which I mean, I guess essentially, yes. These are what these hormones are. This is progesterone, progestation. But for us as females, hormones is way more than just about fertility. It absolutely is important for fertility and a really, really big importance, but it is so beyond that with regard to the health of the female, like absolutely your health and structure. So I think that birth control and that conversation, it is and can be a very fear-based conversation. And as much as I do truly believe that when possible, we really need to consider coming off of birth control as soon as possible, I also want to be really thoughtful to what that female has gone through, and perhaps the reason she's been on it. Because frankly, I'm a female and I have absolutely been in that doctor's office that is very scary and maybe just intimidating, maybe not scary is the right word, but very intimidating. And when you have that discussion about, hey, I want to come off my birth control, you can be made to feel, it's wrong, it's guilty, it's scary. You're setting yourself up for all these things. But at the same rate, we're also saying, hey, listen, by staying on birth control, you actually could be doing some scary things too. So I think it comes down to a really appropriate conversation with that individual.
Mm-hmm. So if someone is trying to come off of birth control and they don't even know how to start, like with the question of why am I on it, how would you suggest they go about like even starting the process of getting off of it or seeing if it's even worth coming off of it?
Yeah. So first off, I definitely like asking that question, like, why did you get on it in the first place? And outside of getting into all the zillion specific reasons, if it's just like, I don't know, they put it on to regulate my cycles, which is again completely false. It does not regulate your cycle at all. It just regulates a pill bleed.
Yeah. Can we pretend
No.
that our ideal or our visionary person is like on it because of horrendous like cramps and side effects and acne and mood swings, like you said, that roller coaster?
Yeah. So, for myself, well, even with that, there's going to be a lot more questions. I know. So I'm going to say finding out the why. We won't go into all those whys, but then number two, I do suggest that my females, which birth control you're on, that's obviously going to matter. What is this, an IUD? Is this, an oral pill, like a tricycline? Like, again, that's going to be important to know, because that's important to know what hormones you're putting in your body, because you need to understand that you are putting steroid hormones in your body. So I think that's always interesting when someone's like, I'm not taking anything, and I don't want to be put on hormones, but yet they're on a birth control. And I'm like, you realize you're actually taking synthetic hormones. So finding out what they're on, and then I do suggest getting lab work done prior to coming off of birth control. I think it's really important to see where a client's at. Yes, I understand that likely you are going to see hormones that are very low and suppressed, likely, not always. And that is just from me anecdotally looking at a lot of lab work over the time and working with a lot of females, is that absolutely is not always the case. And I think it's really important to kind of get like a nice baseline for where that person is at, find out what their previous history of their cycles, what they were like prior to coming off birth control, because all of these pieces are going to be pieces that you can take with you on what things may look like when you're coming off birth control. And then, like I said, getting lab work, and then making sure that our foundations are paramount. So I absolutely suggest that we make sure we have nutrition completely solid. We're working sleep hygiene, hydration, movement. We have our habits in place, because these habits are supporting the body's immune system, supporting the stress response. And so anything that we can do, I'm going to say free, understanding food's not free, but anything that we can do to support digestion, support liver, support gallbladder, support, thyroid health, all of these things are going to be supporting the body. And so when we do make changes and we do start coming off of birth control, we do kind of already have some pieces at play with regard to supporting the body's detoxification, which again is super important. There might be some supplements that, depending on the individual, depending on all that previous information, that may be appropriate to kind of help things happen. And then once somebody comes off of birth control, that's when we really start to see, number one, does anything happen at all? Two, what does happen? And then three, just start gathering that information so we can start kind of moving forward from there.
Okay. So it's kind of a play it by ear, because not everyone is going to have a terrible experience if they come off of it. Or I think I heard one of your older shows, it was on YouTube, and it was like, sometimes you can have like your hormones go completely out of whack right away. Sometimes it's delayed and then the hose opens, or it can just be they're kind of like depressed and down for a while, and they slowly pick up.
Yeah. And so for myself, like I mentioned, support what I know prior to actually pulling birth control out. And then once we get the birth control out of the realm, I do not start, immediately supporting this, that, and the other, because again, we need to allow the body to see what is going to happen, which happens rather quickly for most people. We're going to see one or two things, or one of the three things happen, right? And we're going to see that probably within like the first 8 to 10 weeks. We're going to get an idea of where things start to happen or don't happen. And then at that point, once we start to see some trends, that's when we can make a better assessment of, number one, what does need to be supported, and two, when we need to get lab work done again. And that's what's really important, is once we start to see that a cycle is coming back. Like, a lot of people will get a bleed post pill, but doesn't mean that you've ovulated. You've been on birth control, right? So the likelihood of you ovulating is like slim to none. Absolutely, you're probably going to get a bleed. But getting that first cycle, and then getting a second cycle, and ideally getting a third cycle, and then pinpointing some times to get some lab work again, to then start to see where things are at, getting your feedback, getting your sleep, seeing how long your cycles are, how heavy your cycles are, then you can support something. But having a female just coming off of birth control, again, I said I typically do support her very lightly, but I'm not like, hey, let's kickstart everything. She might be freaking kickstarted already, and that can really be a bad situation. But the pre and doing the investigative homework and getting as much information as you can, that's a fantastic way to set up a female post birth control. Like absolutely, it can be a very smooth experience, but getting that information about what things looked like before is so crucial.
It's really important. Yeah, because you can't know what you need to change if you don't have data.
Absolutely. And again, it's going to matter, like, how old is this individual? Like, it's one thing if
Yeah.
somebody is like in her 20s coming off of birth control. It's another thing when you have somebody who's in her 40s or 50s and she's been on it for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
Just looking at her age alone, you kind of know what you might be seeing. But when you start to get into this more menopausal group, that's when it's going to be really important to absolutely get some more lab work. And it may take a couple rounds of lab work to really assess like what's happening with like that FSH, what's happening with that LH, what is her body really doing? So you know where her body is at.
Okay. Yeah, I like that process. Like it's not a do this or supplement with this, but let's start here.
Yeah.
So, okay, so that's just one of the few things. You mentioned strength training, nutrition, digestion, and stress management, which we talked about a little bit more in depth last time. So I'm not going to go back through that. But so let's say that somebody is about to go into menopause or they're in perimenopause and they start experiencing like more intense, I want to say like inflammation or sensitivities to foods and certain like lifestyle things, like let's say even sugar. How would you suggest that someone like approaches that?
So it's really interesting. So, with regard to perimenopause, typically, I'm going to say typically, because again, I see a lot of females, I work with a lot of females, and I see a lot of different things. And typically during that time, that's when we're going to see a drastic fall in progesterone. And we're going to see estrogen's going to hang on longer and she's going to kind of fluctuate up and down, but she's on her way down as well. And so during this time, though, when we're seeing that progesterone do a really big sharp decline, and typically that perimenopause time frame is going to be, women in her, well, now it's getting even earlier, but I'm going to say in her late 30s to early 40s. That's when we're looking. And just the immune changes that happens by just talking about estrogen and progesterone alone is going to be massive, especially with regard to that drop in progesterone and perhaps a time period where we can say that there's estrogen is going to be predominant over progesterone. But again, like estrogen's declining. It's not necessarily what people think of as actual estrogen dominance. That is going to be more so into those fertility years, but still having that unopposed estrogen, or not, I'm not going to use the word balance, but unopposed estrogen can absolutely create a little bit of a mismatch with regard to histamine within the female's body. And also looking at the adrenals, which the adrenals are going to be really important for that immune response. I mean, just estrogen and progesterone is so important for the immune system, but the adrenals themselves are going to be starting to take more of the load with regard to helping with hormone production, and just the time frame of what's happening in a female's life during this time. So we have a person who might have kids, may not, might have aging parents, might not, might be rising in their career. So there's a lot of stress and things happening. So the body is really can be getting kicked quite hard with regard to that immune system. And so we can start to see quite a lot of immune changes because of that adrenals really kind of taking a lot of hit. And again, they're not responsible for hormonal production, and they're not going to really be giving you a lot. It's like a slow drip. But that cortisol response absolutely gets kicked pretty hard during this time frame. And then again, with those declining hormones, that is going to affect your immune system. It's going to affect basically all those mucosal linings, epithelial linings throughout the body. So that includes your nose, it includes your lungs. That's really important. And so we might find a female during this time is more sensitive or having more histamine type reactions because of many factors. One, the hormone decline, and then two, just again, not getting into the stress bucket, but what's happening with regard to stress on her body and the adrenal health. And then all that plays back into that digestive health, which again, that digestive health is impacted by those fluctuating hormones. Because when I talked about those the mucosal lining, the epithelial barrier, that also includes our digestive tract, that includes that intestine, right? And so that is super important because our digestive health plays a massive role with regard to our immune function. And then the excretion of things. So it's really important that it's not necessarily just a hormonal piece, but it's the hormonal piece and how it affects other systems within the body, understanding nothing is in isolation. And so during this time, a lot of females can, because of these stress pieces, can feel very run down. This is where, some people, like, again, having that adrenal adaptation can be quite prominent during this time. And immune system responses can be either really heightened or really low. And maybe it's not because of just the hormonal changes that are inevitable during this time, but perhaps it's about, like, what were you doing in your early 20s and early 30s? Were you chronically dieting? Were you chronically exercising while under eating? Because again, like, this is that allostatic load, right? And so there's a lot of pieces that happen, but I think that is where we start really looking at that allostatic load and are seeing it is when I see females in their like 30s to early 40s, and then where that perimenopause period starts to begin, which is that late 30s, early 40s, because of that hormonal decline. Because again, we're losing that rhythmic peaks during that time.
So let this be a reminder for everyone and permission to chill out and focus on stress management sooner rather than later.
Do you know, I'll just like insert one thing, and this is always the case. And I actually said this to one of my mentors. When we talk about having boundaries, it's not about other people. Yeah. It's about yourself. Like, it's about yourself upholding your own boundaries. And that is like, personal speaking, like, that is so difficult to do. And I think a lot of females perhaps were taught, or just, again, regardless on their generation, on who raised them, it's this act of, feeling bad, feeling guilty, feeling like saying no means you're, a weenie, you're, being lazy. Like, I hear that laziness, like, I hear that word so often. And I'm like, you literally, your day's activities took up like a 2-page Word document, and you're telling me you felt lazy? Like, oh my gosh. But it's really important during this time too, because, I mentioned this, 30-year-old, 30 to 40-year-old time frame is also that time where, people are postpartum. We're seeing so much immune changes during this time because of the impacts on hormones. And again, it kind of goes back to, unfortunately, that adrenal piece too, because if we are over exercising, over stressing, but we're under eating, like, our body is going to adapt. And so our hormones, not being in perimenopause, like, say we're in like early 30s, those hormones are going to adapt, and we're going to not be having ovulatory cycles. And perhaps our estrogen is going to be very low. And we absolutely have to have adequate estrogen to spike to have ovulation. And if we don't have adequate estrogen, we're not going to even have adequate receptors for progesterone. And there's estrogen and progesterone receptors all over the body. So that's kind of important.
Yeah. Dang. That was a lot of information. Okay. No, good information. A lot. Okay, so it's going to happen. Progesterone and estrogen are dropping no matter what. You can set yourself up.
It's gonna happen. You can seed cycle all you want, but there is no amount of sunflower seeds that are going to prevent the inevitable.
I just learned about seed cycling. Anyways, so it's more about setting yourself. I love that. Okay. You're shaking your head with your eyes.
Yeah.
It's about setting yourself up with quality habits as soon as you can to optimize your hormone health. Well, short term, also the long term. So if let's say you've been a chronic dieter for your entire life, leading up to
the majority of females, let's just say.
Yes. Raise your hand if you're watching. So let's say you're in your 40s, you're starting perimenopause, and you've been dieting your whole life, yo-yo dieting, whatever, restricting calories. And now you're struggling with a lot of sensitivities, your digestion is really like terrible, and you're starting to experience all the things you just mentioned. How would you suggest that someone like supports themselves through that? Like, what's the biggest thing to focus on? Is it like eating probiotic foods or taking a certain supplement? I don't think it's going to be. But I'm just curious, is it sleep, stress management? What's the biggest thing you see as a trend with your clients? Where should people start?
For supporting them for that perimenopause when they're seeing hormones decline?
Yeah, when the hormones are declining and their immune system is like down and they're feeling sick and tired.
Honestly, I'm going to say starting with what's happening within your life. I'm going to say looking at your habits, looking at your commitments.
Everything goes back
Um,
to minutes. I love it.
looking at your commitments, when someone, and you know what, I'm saying all these things, speaking to myself. If you're ever saying that, I don't have enough time in the day, you're pulling all-nighters, like if you're not getting adequate sleep, like just going back to like how, I'm seeing
Boundaries.
clients that are getting like 5 and 6 hours of sleep, and like our brain really does need, at least 6, 7 hours. Like we need to have, like, it actually has a system to like kind of clean out the trash. And that
Yep.
system needs a amount of time to do that. And we can't make up those hours. So I'm going to say looking at your commitments is going to be huge. Making sure that you're fueling yourself appropriately for the amount of activity you are doing, which is very scary for a lot of people. Looking
Yeah.
at your digestive health is crucial because, again, we are what we absorb, and we are what we don't get out, right? We're not having regular bowel movements, regular meaning daily.
Yep.
Whatever we're not excreting, we are recirculating. So talk about we are what we absorb. Let's just think about that. So that is going to be super, super important. And that's the free stuff. I think that there is absolutely a population of clients that perhaps to maximize their health and where they're at, I do think that there might be some advanced strategies with regard to nutrition and supplements that are absolutely needed for a short-term period. But
Mhm.
I
To
truly,
support.
yep, I truly think that we really need to educate with regard to nutrition,
Yeah.
which is going to be, I love utilizing macronutrients. So tracking macros, not, if it fits your macros, but tracking macros and micronutrients, because those macros and micros is what makes our body go round and makes those hormones happen. Again,
Mhm.
looking at cholesterol, looking at fat, like our body needs cholesterol in order to produce steroid hormones. We
Mhm.
absolutely need adequate, potassium. We need salt for, hydrochloric production with regard to our stomach acid. We need, funny enough, we actually need estrogen for that as well.
Mhm.
So I think I will always be a coach that comes back to the basic foundations before I get into heroics.
Yeah.
That being said, I also do find that sometimes going to I'm going to say more heroic strategy with regard to a meal plan can be a really great concept for many clients who truly don't know how to eat and
Yeah.
perhaps have quite a fear around calorie consumption. And so I think at that point, and I've used that with many clients, with saying, hey, well, let's get on this meal plan because you're eating 1,200 calories, which is truly not enough to keep a toddler alive. And it's a great way that we can jump things up to getting them, again, not saying these numbers specifically, but something like 2,000 calories. And they start to feel great. They start to actually have regular bowel movements. They're sleeping better. And I think it can build their confidence. So
Yeah.
outside of those things, I do just want to mention too that having these things, foundational nutrition, digestive health, understanding there might be some heroics that might be needed to get those things optimized. I think it is really important to have lab work done, and you do not need to wait. This is the other thing I do want to talk about with regard to hormone replacement therapy, is that you do not need to wait, and I do not recommend waiting until you are postmenopausal to have those considerations, just because of all the things I've already said with regard to the decline in hormones. I believe in supporting a female's body, naturally, absolutely, but there is not anything unnatural about a female's hormone. If your thyroid hormones were declining, nobody would think twice about putting somebody on thyroid medication. If your eyesight were declining, would you not get glasses? It's really important. And then, like what I was all mentioning about all the impacts of hormones on the female body, waiting until you are symptomatic or not, because understanding you don't have to be symptomatic for your body to be changing and having, your brain health declining. Like, it's all fun and games until you fracture a hip. It's all fun and games until you start to have, brain fog, which is going to lead later on down the line. We could be looking at possibly dementia. We could be looking at Alzheimer's. And here again, that's where hormones have this protective role. And a lot of people think that you have to wait until they have hot, like vasomotor symptoms, hot flashes, night sweats. You do not need to wait that long, but you probably won't even notice you're having any changes unless, number one, you're tracking your cycle, and two, you are getting routine lab work, which you have to do.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of blood work. I think it's more accessible nowadays, so people can actually like affordably get it. It's like $100 to get, at least what I found, like to get testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, like get all those tested like every 6 months, worth it.
Yeah, I will say that it is important, I think, to definitely, I know for any clients that I start with, I do ask them to get full lab work, and full lab work is going to be looking at probably $200 to $300, because it is important for us to, again, look at the system. So look at the thyroid, and it's not just a TSH, right? So which is a brain hormone. It's not even a thyroid hormone. Looking at TSH is actually looking at the brain. Then it's also looking at the actual thyroid gland, as well as looking at antibodies. So you can really start putting together the pieces of what's happening in this individual's body. Getting partial lab work just leads to more questions than anything.
And more lab work.
Yeah. And, something else I do suggest for my female clients too, and that you can do is, especially for a female in her, I would say 30s, maybe early 40s, I do like getting a Dutch test. Dutch test cycle mapping can be very helpful, where you're actually mapping the cycle throughout the month. But getting a Dutch test, I think, is absolutely phenomenal, because you're not only looking at the hormones, you're looking at the metabolites. So that's how they break down within the body. And you're actually looking at also the detoxification mechanisms of those hormones. You're looking at the adrenals, you're looking at the total production, as well as what's breaking down. You're looking at organic acids. So I like getting a Dutch test for any female who is, honestly, anybody, but especially if we are considering any type of hormone replacement therapy. I think it is very insightful. It's also a really nice window, so I can see how I can support her better, as well as it's really great for whatever practitioner she is working with regard to her HRT, that they can support her appropriately as well.
And have the full picture. Mm-hmm. So we are about to wrap up in maybe 5 more minutes, but my favorite thing that you mentioned before, when you basically unloaded all this knowledge, was boundaries. Could you speak on that for just a second? A lot of the people I work with are busy moms or professionals, and they're taking off right now. They have all these opportunities and they're busy and they don't have time. They don't have time to do these things. How do we even start setting boundaries? Where do you start?
Well, I think the first thing that we need to consider is, what don't we have time to do? Is it that we don't have time to take care of ourselves? Well, then how the hell are you going to take care of somebody else? As well as, what example are you setting for the people that you are supposedly taking care of? You are essentially telling, if you have kids, be that example. It's not that there's a season to take care of yourself and there's a season not to take care of yourself. It's how we take care of ourselves may look different depending on the season that we're in, but despite the season, we need to be looked after. And I think that there's no better way than to have somebody in your corner. And perhaps, you know what, maybe sometimes that person really is just a cheerleader. Maybe sometimes it's like, hey, you know what? You fucking showed up. Hell yeah. Maybe that's all you need.
Yeah.
Maybe you don't need, oh, well, let's change, 10 grams down of this week, 10 grams up, and you're looking at your macros. Often the changes that need to be made is, hey, no change this week. Let's just refine what we have. That can be the move. But having that check-in with somebody and having that person that looks after you and sees the trends weeks, months, because this is the other thing with regard to female health is a coach sees and hears what your day-to-day, your week-to-week, and your month-to-month life looks like. When you go to your physician and you're like, I am stressed out, I'm not sleeping, they're not going to start digging into what foods you're eating, the food quality, the food quantity, how much sleep you're getting, how much water you're drinking. How are you having a bowel movement day every day? Are you having diarrhea? Is it greasy? Is it floating? They're not going to get into all that stuff.
Yeah.
They're going to be like, oh, you're depressed, you're tired. Here's an anti-anxiety medication, or here's an antidepressant. Nothing against these things, but that's not looking at what's happening. Instead, a coach is going to say, hey, I think you have a reason to be tired right now. And maybe we need to look at, again, what is the boundary? The boundary should not be like, oh, I don't have time for my health right now. Perhaps we look at what we're tracking and what we're not tracking. Maybe it's like, I implore this with several clients. I'm like, hey, guess what? Let's have 2 full days. I don't want you touching a tracking app. Don't track. Just actually use the knowledge that you have gained and that the habits that you're practicing on the other 5 days of the week, and just do that. Eat 4 to 5 times a day. Buy us protein at have something that's a vegetable, have a fruit, live your life, be present. But dropping off and saying, I don't have time to take care of myself, I just truly feel like that's the most massive disservice, because if you don't have time to take care of yourself, how are you going to show up to the things that you're supposedly, prioritizing? Again, that may need to shift. And so for some coaches, I feel that, we have these seasons where like you must train and, all these things. And absolutely, we need to have these tough conversations with the clients and say, hey, listen, you know what? Do you need me to be supportive and empathetic, or do you need me to be matter of fact? I need to know that, because I've kind of heard this over and over again. But again, how we support you, that's called coaching. That's how things change. And
I've had clients before where I'm like, okay, tell me about your last week. And they're like, I don't even remember what happened yesterday. And I'm not making fun of them. I experience that also daily, but it's so nice to have someone like force you to reflect, in my experience. Like,
absolutely.
Yeah. Then you get to see, oh my gosh, I actually only ate vegetables once last week. Like, what?
Yeah.
You
nailed it. Like it's so important. And it comes back down to, again, your health. So you're going to go to the doctor and then tell them that you have all these symptoms, but they're not going to address what you're doing on the day to day. They're not going to. Another example too, I have clients come in that have perhaps like horrendous digestive health, and we go to, perhaps start a digestive health protocol. Their lifestyle does not set them up for success. And we have to have that conversation about, hey, let's set you up to be ready for that digestive health protocol. And if that's not happening, then we need to have an even bigger discussion, because number one, that matters, and it matters for your goals. And we need to make sure that our actions are aligning for our ultimate goals.
It's all, oh my gosh, it's all like mindset work and self-talk. And in the end, it's like you're changing your story. So you do have to have those tough conversations, and that that's like the fun of being a coach. I get to practice having tough conversations.
Yeah.
But
You know what? Our stories can change. We can set out to have this goal. And then you know what? Life is going to get in the way. It is
always.
inevitable. Life is going to happen. It's going to kick you to the side. And perhaps the goal, maybe that trajectory does need to change. And you know what? Some people say, don't change the goal, change the path. Well, you know what? I deal with a lot of females in their 30s to 60s. And let me tell you, when you have somebody who is in the hospital facing, losing a parent, or, they're becoming the primary caregiver for their parents, like sometimes the actual goal changes. So perhaps they have this physique goal and we can obtain that, but maybe we need to go a little slower.
Yeah. And be more present or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh, I love this. This is all pure gold. I wasn't expecting.
I love getting to meet with you. We need to do this more often.
In 6 months after your
Yes.
program.
Yes, and you'll be post-graduated and moved and all the things. When we talk about stress management, we just like unpacked a lot, like right there.
But also, so I really we didn't go live right before, when we were having that conversation, but we were literally talking about how we've set our own boundaries and our own lives of not taking on too many things at once. As enticing as it is, as many like opportunities as there are, you still have to prioritize your health. Otherwise, like going to school and you're groggy and you miss all of it, like you just wasted all of that time. So
yeah,
we're living examples.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the biggest thing too. I think that both of us can agree on is we want to be able to walk that talk. And I think that sometimes that means being humble enough to say, hey, you know what? I need to tighten in my boundaries as well. So it might look like pulling back so you can slingshot forward.
Yes, ma'am. Okay, we're ending on that. That was a mic drop. Thank you. If you watched live, leave your questions below, and thank you for coming on, Mare.
Of course, we will be doing this again.